Tell me about, so you've been patrolling the streets, right?
Yeah.
Tell me what it is like. So what do regular people have no idea about patrolling the streets? How dangerous it is? In what kind of situations have you been?
It's very dangerous, and it doesn't matter where you work, right? Because you're a walking billboard resembling, law and order, and at any point you could become subject to an attack. A regular day in a patrol vehicle is, there's nothing more fun than that. Because anything could happen at any moment, and it's your responsibility to resolve the problem. So you could be going from you be in your patrol unit, and you're just driving along, and you're looking through the community to see if anything is out of place, or there is suspicious behavior by someone that's maybe hanging outside of a closed business at midnight that maybe should be contacted to see if they're engaging in some sort of activity that would suggest that they're going to burglarize the location. And then you get a call of a domestic violence or a battered, let's say, spouse that finally decided that she was going to have enough courage to call the police, or there's a missing kid, or there's a medical emergency, or you have the intense calls where you have like a burglary in progress in the middle of the night, or an armed robbery, right?
So that's the front line.
Yeah, you could go from a call that is really just mundane, like an everyday call to help a citizen, to an in-progress call with a violent suspect that is not going to go back to prison, that is armed with a weapon and is ready to use it against you. And you have to be able to have the, not just the training, the experience, but the presence of mind to be able to address that suspect, gain control of that suspect, and take that suspect into custody without injuring any innocent bystanders that might be around. When you're involved in a felonious vehicle pursuit with someone that you know is armed and that doesn't want to go back to prison, and they have an extensive criminal history, that poses a very significant threat to the police officer and to the community. And so being a police officer is the most challenging job that there is, and it's only those that have worn the uniform, that have stepped into a patrol car after swearing an oath to uphold and protect the Constitution, that really understands what it's like. Not even a simple ride-along could ever give you enough information to allow a normal citizen to understand what it's like to be a police officer. Because although it is a job, it's also a calling. And at the end of the day, our police officers live with the realities of what doing the job can do to someone's mind. They have the highest divorce rate. They have the highest rates of alcoholism. And most cops can't sleep. So after retiring, it's been my goal to help cops to understand that what they're going through is normal. There is a way back, that this is not a death sentence, and that at the end of the day, all of us have to find our way home at the end of the day, not just physically, but with our mind too.
So Nick, hear me out. So when I was a kid, I'm 36 years old. I was watching Hollywood movies since I was 5 years old, something like that. And I was always watching those Hollywood movies with cops, buddy movies, all that stuff, And every time I saw that, the image of a police officer here in the U.S. always in my mind was like, you can't touch a police officer. You can't shoot back, you can't fight back, because if you do, you're screwed. So in my mind, police officers here in the U.S. were always well respected. I want to say a month ago, that was in Washington, right? There were riots, pro-Palestine riots, and they were going at it with the police officers. They were fighting with them, and nothing happens at all. So the profession of being a police officer is under-respected now? Something has changed, or it was always like that?
So, complicated question, but I will say this. There has always historically been in this country issues between the community and law enforcement, depending on where you lived, depending on the time or the era. There's always been a strange component to how communities interact and engage with law enforcement, but really it's influenced by political trends and what's going on politically in the country or in the state.
Yes.
Having said that, the simplest answer to your question is that everyone has always respected law enforcement, right? Because people understand what those selfless, servant leaders do every single day to protect us, and we need them. But what you started to see, especially in 2020, was a complete shift in the political rhetoric and tone that became very dangerous to the profession of law enforcement and to every single community in the country. And you saw it happen almost overnight. And that was that law enforcement is the problem and it's not the criminal. It's law enforcement's fault for all of society's ills because these politicians assigned blame and basically said there is historic evidence of law enforcement being systemically racist. They're all racists. So what we're going to do is we're going to reimagine law enforcement and basically handcuff our police officers, and we're going to legislate laws to be pro-criminal and be anti-crime victim, anti-public safety, anti-police, right? And that's when you started seeing law enforcement agencies change their tactics and try to become a little bit more aligned with what was going on politically, because who in their right mind, number one, who in their right mind would be a police officer and put your life on the line every day for strangers? One. Two, who in their right mind, especially in LA County or in other counties where you have George Soros-funded DAs, just itching to charge a police officer for a crime when a police officer uses force to defend themselves or to overcome a suspect during the course of an arrest? Officers are charged with the responsibility to use reasonable force to effect an arrest, right? But what happened with our politicians is they emboldened criminal offenders by telling them, law enforcement is the problem. It's not you. We're going to coddle the criminal offender, right? We're going to focus on decarceration with our state prisons and county jails. And, poor you guys. It's the police. It's this institutional racism in law enforcement, which was the biggest lie that was ever told. And what they did was that they started using what's called RIPA as an example of collecting data after every traffic stop. And the data that they collected, they tried to use against the law enforcement community to say, you guys are absolutely racist. See, it says right there in the results of the RIPA data, which RIPA, and I'll just explain it real quick. The RIPA data is after every time a police officer makes an arrest or does a traffic stop, they have to fill out what they believe the person's gender was, race, and it goes on and on and on. And what you thought that those things were before the stop actually occurred. There's no box for unknown or did not observe. Now, if you're working in a primarily, like an 80 to 90%, if you're working in a city that's like 80 to 90% Hispanic or black or white, you're more likely to stop someone that is Hispanic, right? Or if it's 80 to 90% black,
that
or white,
racist.
white. So what they did is they took that RIPA data to say, look, they're stopping all of these people, and it's all, right? Well, that's a lie, and they know it's a lie. But in order for them to achieve what they want in terms of criminal justice reform, is what they'll tell you it is, which really it's the dismantling of the criminal justice system and complete chaos. And they're doing this very intentionally, and they're doing it incrementally. And what people have to understand is that when you have the politicians that are funded by Soros, and you have lawmakers like in the assembly who are bought and paid for politicians that allow big money, special interests to influence the way they legislate, right? It's a recipe for disaster. And when you've got media that's also bought and paid for or influenced by the same people, they're creating a narrative that is not true, it's false, and everyone loses. Law enforcement loses and the community loses because they're not safe. And as a result of everything that we've seen in the last several years, we're seeing a mass exodus as a result of law enforcement officers that are retiring early, or they're resigning, or they're finding another profession, or they're moving out of California altogether because no one wants to be a target. Being a cop is hard enough, and they are destroying law enforcement, and they're destroying it in California and have been doing it in California first, because everything that happens in California, it's like the saying, so goes the nation. And law enforcement in California typically is known as the most, the best trained. Tactics usually travel from California to other agencies throughout the country, east. Technology, weapon systems, everything in law enforcement typically starts in California and travels east. And this was an epic failure. This was a criminal justice experiment that is a very dark stain on our state and in our country. They allowed police buildings in Minnesota to get burned down. They allowed these people to basically create their own camps and cities and neighborhoods, right, where the police, for the first time you saw on TV, are retreating, right? So what kind of message does that send to the rest of the country and to the people who are real criminals? You're telling them you have carte blanche to go do what you want with impunity, and you're not going to be held accountable for your actions. And at the end of the day, people want order, because you can't have a civilized society without order. And the people that are standing in the gap to protect innocent people from bad people are the police.
Yeah. But they're creating the chaos. But I believe they think that they can control it. You can control the chaos. Once it starts, that's it. That's like a twister.
Right.
It's unstoppable.
Yeah.
They're going to get them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're seeing smash and grabs. You're seeing criminals. Like when Prop 47 passed, I'll never forget when Prop 47 passed. When Prop 47 passed.
That's what, 2022?
No. When Prop 47 was, I think it was 2013 or 14.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this was the legislation that basically decriminalized crime, right? It brought petty theft, like the prices for petty theft. It used to be under $400. Anything over $400 used to be a grand theft, right? It used to be a felony. They've raised that to like $950, right? They've incentivized drug use. They decriminalized. They turned serious narcotic offenses into misdemeanors, right? So now whereas you would be taking them to jail, you're fingerprinting them, then you give them a ticket, and you're walking them out the back door before you can even finish your report. And what the left says is this, okay? This is what the supermajority in Sacramento says. It's not compassionate. They say, mass incarceration, these buzzwords, mass incarceration, that's not compassionate. It's not compassionate because the law is disproportionately applied to people of color, right? So we need to equal the playing ground, and we need to reduce the sentencing guidelines and the penalties for serious crimes, because it's all these people of color, and this is just not compassionate. Well, let me say this. It's not compassionate to create a system where people are being victimized with increasing frequency. It's not compassionate to incentivize and allow people to pitch tents anywhere they want and to bring their children into California and sleep on the sidewalk. That's not compassionate. It's not compassionate to crime victims, like my friend Megan McCarthy, retired San Bernardino sheriff's deputy, who was attacked on duty in the middle of responding to a call for service. It was a domestic dispute, family disturbance, where the suspect took her gun, beat her in the head, broke multiple bones in her face, and then tried to kill her with her own gun. Well, because he was, and by the grace of God, she survived that. But because of AB 3070, which means that if you have police bias and you don't like the police in a jury trial, the district attorney or whoever can't remove that juror because of prejudice or bias. So what they did was allowed people who don't like the police to be on a jury of an attempted murder of a law enforcement officer, and he was acquitted. And because he was acquitted, now almost a little over a year later, the U.S. Attorney's Office, in conjunction with the ATF, Federal Law Enforcement Agency, just charged him, brought him into custody on federal charges because local DAs aren't doing their jobs. And this is a serious crisis. People have to understand how serious this is. They have completely flipped the criminal justice system upside down. There's no more respect for the rule of law. There are core principles in our country that we were founded on, including the rule of law, equal justice under the law. And there is no equal justice right now under the law, and there is no rule of law because you have corrupt politicians that are beholden to these special interest groups that are hell-bent on destroying this country, that are hell-bent on continuing to destroy California. And we have to turn this around. We cannot, California and this country cannot sustain itself in chaos. And the amount of destruction that has taken place is frightening. And police officers, in so many cases, are being maliciously prosecuted by DAs that want to make examples out of law enforcement. This is so...
For doing their own job.
For doing their own job. And what they'll do is they'll take video of a police officer using force and say, you know what, that last time that he hit that suspect,
too much.
We think it's too much. Let's charge him for abuse under color of authority. And let's make an example out of him. What does that say to the entire law enforcement community? Absolutely hands off, absolutely hands off. And so, but now we're seeing, the complete dismantling of law enforcement. Some agencies are way more, aggressive in being proactive, and they have very good, solid command staff members that say, look, go do your job, do it right, stay within the confines of the law, and I will support you, right? No one wants a bad cop. No one wants a corrupt law enforcement officer. Those people get weeded out and absolutely need to be held accountable. But the narrative and the notion that there is systemic racism in law enforcement or that all cops are bad is just another lie that is intentionally used to advance these policy agendas and legislation that seeks to continue to destroy law enforcement. And at the end of the day, we're seeing that unravel. We saw it in 2020, and now we're seeing, look at what happened to UCLA. That police chief, unfortunately, should have done the right thing. That police chief who answers to, the chancellor or the board or whatever it is at UCLA, when we saw what these pro-Hamas people were doing, he should have said at that moment, he should have made the most important decision of his career, which was, you know what, I'm probably going to get fired, but I'm going to do my job. Yeah. And officers go end this immediately so that it doesn't, continue into what it turned into. And he should have fell on the sword and allowed himself to proudly be terminated because he would have been following the law. Instead, he put his own career ahead of what was doing the right thing, and look what happened. And so, I'm very, when it comes to law enforcement, my expectations are high. And I think that's true of all law enforcement officers. We have to have high expectations when it comes to our own. But we need courage. We need courage. We need political courage with our law enforcement leaders and our political leaders to say enough's enough and call out what's really going on so that we can end the madness. Because what we're seeing, Apollo, on TV and what you see every single day out on the street is not representative of who we are. And the truth is, the normal everyday citizen does not want that. They're just so busy trying to put food on the table and sometimes having 2 and 3 jobs that that's all they're focused on.
So obviously I'm a foreigner. So when I see in the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months what the pro-Hamas protesters do here, for instance, what they did in once Netanyahu was here in DC, so they run the Palestine flags, at the same time they burn the American flags. It's like, what? Can you do that? Okay. They vandalize the sculptures, the statues. Can you do that? Then they fight with the police officers. Can you do that? That's mind-boggling for us. As a foreigner, I was like, I always thought that Americans, you stand up for your country, but you let some guys take your own flag, the most beautiful flag on earth, take the flag, burn it, and almost pee on it, spit on it, and then to fight the police officers?
It's the most despicable thing I have ever seen. They are desecrating the core values and tenets of what this country was founded on, right? And this is not a random, sporadic thing that we're seeing. It is absolutely sophisticated. It is absolutely intentional. It is pre-planned. And it is not just some random act of violence. And so we're seeing heavily funded groups that are doing what they're doing in the acts that you just described. And it's being allowed to happen. And it shouldn't be. You know, they do this under the First Amendment. And I think it is just it's such a dark stain on our country. It makes me sick. When I see that, I will say to you, it breaks my heart. Like, it breaks my heart to see the Liberty Bell, you know, destroyed. When I see historic statues, you know, that, you know, represent our country's history, or the American flag that so many people have given their life for, that paid the ultimate sacrifice for, to give you and I the freedoms that we experience every day, to take that flag and to desecrate it, to burn it. You know, I'm sorry, but that should be an absolute crime, and people should be in jail for that. And we've lost our way. We've lost our way. We've lost our way as a country, and we have to find our way back.